I just got back from India a couple days ago, and I spent a lot of time in India as a young man, my late teens, early 20s, mid-late teens, early 20s, early mid-20s. And I still go there a lot, usually a couple times a year. But when I was 30 years ago, this year, I went to Jaipur for the first time. So Jaipur is it was founded by the Rajput ruler Sawai Jai Singh in 1727. It's a properly laid out modern city with, a cross section of streets that run perpendicular to one another. It's the 10th largest city in India. It's got a population of 4 million people. It's a big city. It's a large city. And it replaced where they used to rule from prior to that, which was the Amar Kingdom, the Amar Fort, which is about 5 miles north of Jaipur proper. And they had a huge, it was the third largest wall in the world, a massive fort, trumps anything I've ever seen in Europe, several-fold. Just this huge fort. And then there's another fort just above it in case that fort was overtaken, then they could move back to this other fort and then defend from there. It's a real wonder of the world. Makes the Taj Mahal look like a peanut, really, honestly, but it's a huge complex. Really impressive. But anyway, what not as many people know is that Jaipur is the chief deity of the entire city of Jaipur is who? Yeah, the chief deity of the city of Jaipur is Govindaji. Radharani got added later on. And that deity of Govindaji was Rupa Goswami's deity. And this is acknowledged by the king of Jaipur himself. His official stamp, his seal that he would, dip in wax and seal official letters with or sign documents with, says Shri Govinda Charanam Jai Singh Ashraya, that Jai Singh takes shelter of the feet of Govinda. And so when he established Jaipur, almost immediately, and I guess we'll have to go back a little bit, Islam ruled India for almost 1,000 years. And although it's super unpopular to say anything bad about Islam in woke circles these days, for fear of being branded a neoconservative Republican, the reality is that the largest genocide in the history of human civilization was the Islamic occupation of India. 100 million Hindus were killed over a period of 1,000 years. It beats everybody else, every other genocide you ever heard of. If you put them all together, the Islamic genocide in India beats every other genocide in the history of human civilization put together. You can take all the people that Stalin killed, and all the people that Hitler killed, and all the people that Mao killed, and throw in Pol Pot, and throw in Manifest Destiny, and what we did to the native inhabitants of the U.S., also throw in the transatlantic slave trade, add them all up together, and the Islamic occupation of India beats that. You can even lump in the Great Leap Forward, Mao's failed experiment with centralized farming, and add 20 million to that number, and India still beats it. There were several layers. There was a sultanate in Delhi, which is just a couple of 100 kilometers away. It's 150, 175 miles away from Jaipur. There was a sultanate established in Delhi. Delhi really became the center of the Islamic world for a time. Then they established separate sultanates in the south and to the east. And then that was overthrown by the Mughals. The Mughals were Turkish, Mongolian descendants of Genghis Khan. Babur, the first Mughal ruler, was a descendant of Genghis Khan. And they took over, sacked the Delhi Sultanate, and then established their own kingdom for about 8 generations, 9 generations, several hundred years, starting in the mid 1500s and up through the mid 1700s when the British took over. First through the East India Company, and then eventually through the actual crown of England. So those Islamic rulers, some of them were minimally into Hinduism. Akbar is usually famous for being a disciple of Jud Rup Goswami, and that he helped to build various temples in Vrindavan, and that's true. And he was interested in mysticism. He also killed a ton of Hindus, so it wasn't that he was just this incredible Sufi saint. He also was a regular old Mughal ruler who ruled with an iron fist, and was a despot by today's standards. Maybe by those standards, where your average ruler was a genocidal maniac, hell-bent on the destruction of the entire Hindu population, he was cool, but by today's standards, he was still extremely cruel. Anyway, Vrindavan is the heart of our tradition. It's like our Mecca and our Jerusalem, all wrapped up in one. And really, Vrindavan in North India is the heart of devotion. Hundreds of millions of people consider Vrindavan to be sacred, worship Krishna. At least a third of the Hindu population. And so you're looking at, a quarter billion people easily. If not more. The numbers probably are bigger. In the south you have Tirupati and places like that, but really for North India, Vrindavan is the center of worship. Millions of pilgrims flock there for big festivals. I mean, it's ridiculous. It's huge. As popular as ever. It's as popular as it's ever been. And Vrindavan is just, I don't know, 150 miles from Jaipur. It's very close. So Delhi is here, Vrindavan is here, and Jaipur is here. They're all very, very close to each other. North Central India. So, although the devotion in North India for Krishna flourished and even had some patronage from Islamic rulers, that all changed with Aurangzeb. Aurangzeb was like the fourth or the fifth in the Mughal line, and he was a serious zealot, and he began destroying temples and killing Hindus, like with a vengeance. Eventually he went and fought with the Muslim rulers in the south, and that's how he spent his final years. But there was a chunk of time there where he was just absolutely devastating the scene in Vrindavan, and many of our temples were razed, they were destroyed. At that time, the deities in Vrindavan, so that they would not be broken and ground up and turned into the steps of a mosque, which was the Islamic program, to break the deities and then to use them to make the steps of a mosque. It was like a way of rubbing the Hindus' noses and stuff. Take their most sacred icon and turn it into the steps that the pious Muslims trample on when they go in for their prayers. Those deities were smuggled. People lost their lives. Sometimes they were put in lakes for decades, but largely they got smuggled to Jaipur, where the Rajput kings lived. Those kings were in bed with the Muslims. Jai Singh was friendly with Aurangzeb. It wasn't that they fought the Muslim rulers to a standstill or something like that. They were mighty kings, but they had to engage in politics with the Muslims to survive. And in many ways, the Jats were more natural enemies for the Rajputs than the Muslims were. If you guys are familiar with kings in India during that period of time, Kushum Sarovar was built by the Jat kings. And so there are many holy places, many places that have been developed that were built by the Jat kings. They're both farmers. The Rajputs and the Jats were both farmers that came to power during times of war, took up arms, and then they became Kshatriyas. Even the term Rajput acknowledges that they're not actually Rajas, they're not actually kings. Just like you call the son of a Brahmana a Brahmabandhu, the friend of a Brahmana. So you call the Rajputs the sons of kings, which is a little bit of an acknowledgement that they're not actually from a king's lineage, but they're so good in war, they must be the sons of kings. That's the sentiment. So our tradition got established in Vrindavan during a little brief pause in the fighting, and then it kicked off again. And we were vulnerable because our temples were fully established, and you can't go into hiding or go in the forest. And so those deities were taken to Jaipur, and they left their sacred place and they moved to Jaipur. 4 sets of deities. Madan Mohan moved to Karoli, which is just kind of halfway between Jaipur and Vrindavan, also within Rajasthan, also under the protection of kings. And then Govinda Dev, Damodar, and Gopinath, they all moved to Jaipur proper. And the royal palace in Jaipur, at the heart of Pink City, was Govinda Dev. That's his temple. So if you go to the king's palace in Jaipur, which is the heart of the city, it's the center of the city, then one of the palaces, one of the mahals that was dedicated to the king, the center one, was given to Govinda Dev, and then the king moved to a side palace. and arranged it so that he could look out his window and see the deity every day from his quarters. He'd go out on the veranda and look and see the deity. Eventually, Radharani got added to the equation. That's another phenomenon that happened. So that place, Jaipur, this big city, is super linked to our tradition because it's where, I don't know, half of our super important deities live to this day. If you go to Vrindavan and you see the deities in Vrindavan, those are pratibhumurtis. Those are second images which were made later on after the Muslims died down. They then made replicas of the original deities and put them back in Vrindavan, but the original deities stayed in Jaipur, with the exception of Damodar. Radha Damodar actually moved back to Vrindavan for over 100 years and then moved back to Jaipur in the late 1800s. Jiva Goswami's deities. Anyway, I went back there for the first time in 30 years. And I saw the arti for Govinda Day for the first time in 30 years. It was really nice. We actually went to all three temples in the early morning and did Mangal Arti at all three temples. Because they do them in such a way where you can attend all three if you're quick. And while I was there, I thought a lot about Islam and Hinduism and the really interesting mix of Hinduism and Islamic culture that took place in Rajasthan and that ultimately worked to our benefit because it kept our tradition alive and flourishing even in a period of great religious discrimination. And specifically what happened was, it was early in the morning and I was chanting and the moon was a beautiful crescent. And then I could also see a few stars in the sky. And it was pre-dawn. And I was looking up in the sky and I saw the crescent moon along with a star, and I thought of that symbol, which long predates Islam, but is oftentimes associated with Islam, that crescent and star symbol, which has a history going back thousands of years and was just adopted by the Islamic rulers. But it goes back, twice as old as Islam. The Egyptians used that symbol. So, I was looking up in the sky and I saw that symbol, and I thought about the kings of Jaipur and how they gave shelter to our saints and our deities and protected our tribe in a time where our temples and our saints were being killed and desecrated. And but then also how they were so strongly liaised with the Muslims. And I was just kind of tossing that around in my head, thinking about it. And even if you look at the architecture, even if you look at what you think is Hindu architecture, most likely it's Mughal architecture. And some of the most beautiful elements of Mughal architecture are Islamic elements, Persian elements, Turkish elements, which were joined with Hinduism. There's the whole chhatri, those domes. There's no domes in traditional Indian architecture. That's all from the Muslims. So if you like that dome style, if you like Kushum Sarovar, for instance, and that chhatri style with the ornamental domes, you like Islamic architecture, and that was one of the fruits of the Islamic occupation of India. Along with all the death and carnage, there was also a merging of cultures, and Hindu and like the best of Hindu and Muslim elements got put together, and they formed this just amazing. I mean, everything, the gardens, the architecture, everything got merged together. Even the kurtas, if you wear kurtas, it's not native to India, right? You're from South, but you're wearing that kurta. That's not even native. Even if you look at Hindi, Hindi's 70% Urdu, 30% Sanskrit. You go east to Bengal, and Bangla is 70% Sanskrit and 30% Urdu. And so the closer you were to that part of the world, Punjabi's even, is incredibly. Punjab, Gujarat, Rajasthan, all three of those states in India share borders with Pakistan and are just right there. Pakistan, of course, itself, Sindh was part of India. There was just a whole merging of cultures in that area of the world. And so I was just thinking how, the Muslims, they had a culture, they had community, they had families, they had devotion. They had devotion to a single deity, to a cause of all causes, to an origin of everything. They had a path of grace. They had lineages of saints, especially in that part of the world. So much Sufi mysticism was there. They had beautiful music. If you listen to Qawwali music, it's definitely extremely intoxicating, sexy, beautiful, ornamental, mind-blowing, devotional, all wrapped up in one. And it gives a run for your money to anything that's going on in our Padavali style kirtan, at least in terms of musicality. And so I was thinking about, this culture, these two cultures collided. They intermingled as well, but they also collided. There was a lot of carnage. Most historians will accept that the bloodiest conflict in the history of the human race was the Islamic occupation of India. That's generally accepted by scholars. So although there was a merging of cultures and there was some liaising and borrowing and cross-pollination, it was also a collision. It was a train wreck where 100 million people lost their lives over 1,000 years. And, in the landscape of India was irrevocably changed. So it's easy to just, dismiss Islam. And given what they did to our temples and our tradition. But as I was sitting there and the sun hadn't come up yet, and I was chanting and I was looking at the star and the crescent, and I was thinking about what happened in this place I hadn't been to for 30 years, and I was feeling the place and kind of feeling the energy and appreciating the architecture and the people and how they kept our tradition alive and the cross-pollination, the beautiful elements of another culture, even one that was oppressive. Oppressive is a mild word. And so I was kind of doing that and just really trying to feel the environment that I was in. I had some thoughts, and that's what I want to share with you guys today. Most of this was just a warm-up to get you guys, to get us in the same milieu and to get us in the same place so that I could share my thoughts. I thought that, these Islamic people were willing to give their lives for what they believed in. They believed in one deity, just like us. They believed in devotion. They had music and dance and drama and architecture and places of worship and lineages and all that stuff, just like we have. And they lived in villages. I was actually, I forgot what happened. I heard the call to prayer. That was the stimulus that sparked the whole thing. I heard the call to prayer. And one of our travel mates, Shriji, had told the people the day before that, oh no, these are all just Hindi bhajans going on. And so I would go, oh, there's the call to prayer. And the people I was with in the morning said, no, that's just some Hindi bhajans going on. I said, that's not Hindi bhajans. It's the call to prayer. There's the prayer tower. That's the call to prayer. And you guys know what the call to prayer is, right? You know, those long towers you see. Also in India, you'll see those towers coming up. Became an ornamental element of architecture. Sometimes not just used for a call to prayer, but originally those towers were for calls to prayer. And then the Muslims face Makkah and they pray 5 times a day. And so in any village with even a relatively small Muslim population, you get that call to prayer 5 times a day. And oftentimes it's like really beautiful. The way they chant, it's a cappella, and it's really beautiful. There's a lot of devotion in it. It's quite, and they have different people do it. It's like a kirtan for them, and different people do it. It's one of the 5 pillars of Islam. You do the Hajj, you pray 5 times a day, you profess your faith, you give charities, zakat, and you follow Ramadan. You got 5 things you got to do to be a Muslim, and then one of them is to pray 5 times a day. I heard that call to prayer, and my mind wandered, and I thought of different mosques with their beautiful calligraphy on the outside. Islamic calligraphy is the Arabic that they write verses from the Quran as calligraphy is just really beautiful stuff. And I was just trying to empathize with the people that the Rajput kings liaised with and merged their culture with, such that, their mahals, the Hindu mahals, the Hindu palaces ended up reflecting the Islamic influences. They also adopted other things. Purdah was not so common in India prior to the Islamic occupation. Purdah is the separation of women from men in society, usually through screens, veiled screens, and then also there's the personal purdah, which is through clothing, burqas and what have you. But I was trying to empathize with and appreciate that these were a group of people who deeply held religious beliefs, who wake up early in the morning just like I do, who pray just like I do, who worship one deity as source of all creation just like I do, who have their own food and dance and music and architecture and art and philosophy, who made many contributions to the world. Algebra, algorithm, anything with an al in front of it came from the Muslims. FYI. Alchemy, algebra, algorithms, just go down the list. It's all came from Islam. But then naturally, as I thought about that, now I'm going to slip into the verse I wanted to go over. That was all a warm-up. It was all a warm-up. And I got a verse, and I'm going to tangent with the verse, and I'm going to bring it all back. So just stay with me. But that you could have spaced out a little bit during that whole discussion, and you wouldn't be dead in the water, but don't space out now. Okay? All right. So, there's like those certain turns. If you miss that turn, you end up in if you go, it's like, you could be over here and you go left or right. But if you're over here and you go left, you wind up in the drink. And so there's kind of no recovery. So we're at that juncture. We're in that crossroads in the discussion. The verse I wanted to read. Yo yo yam yam tanum bhakta shradhaya architam ichati. Yo yo yum yum, which means whoever and whatever. Whoever ichati desires architum to worship. Yam yam tanum, who desires to bhakta, who desires to worship bhakta. Or actually, bhakta is mentioned twice. Let's do the verse again. Ya becomes yo yo, when it means whoever. Whoever. Ichati architum. Whoever desires, ichati means they desire. Architum, to worship, to do archa, to do worship. Architum, it's in the infinitive. Who desires to worship. Shraddha, shraddhaya, with faith. Bhakta, devoted to. Tanum, a form. Yum yum, whatever form that is. Whoever it is that has a desire to worship with faith and is devoted to a particular form. Tasya chalam shraddham vedadhamyaham tameva vedadhamyaham. I make his faith strong. Achala means strong. Chal means like chalo, means go, from chal, which means to move. Like chanchala is a name for Lakshmi Devi, because she's always moving. And so this is achala, which is actually a word for mountain in Sanskrit, because it doesn't move. Tasya chalam. For him I make his faith immovable, her faith immovable. Vidadhamyaham. I bestow upon them that immovable faith. So Krishna says here in the Gita that whatever form you desire to worship, whatever form you're devoted to, whatever form you have an inkling to approach, Krishna himself will help make your faith strong in that form. It's a backhanded compliment, as will be shown. It's a backhanded compliment because Krishna's saying you're foolish because you're devoted to that, but the only way you can be devoted to that is if I bless you to be devoted to that, because I'm the source of everything. You follow? So it's a little bit of a backhanded compliment. And this is really Rupanuga Prabhu. Lovely to see you. You welcome back too. Both of us. I heard you were feeling a little sick this week. I did pray for you. I don't know that my prayer was anything but impotent, but I did hear that you were feeling sick right when I got back to town and first came to the temple for darshan. And I immediately, the first prayer I made to the deities, getting back in town, was for your health. So for sure that happened. I don't know if that got you better or not, but I did pray sincerely. All right, Hare Krishna. So it's a little bit of a backhanded compliment because Krishna is saying he's in the pole position. And really this is part of a larger critique of Hinduism that occurs in the Gita. Kamai tai tai kritagyana prapajante anya devata. Tam tam niyamam ashtaya prakritya niyata swaya. Bound by their nature and situated in their vows, people approach other deities, their intelligence stolen by lust. Kritagyana means stolen knowledge. Kamai, by lust. By lust, their knowledge is stolen, and prapadyante, they approach anya devata, other deities. So this is even more of a, it almost sounds biblical. It sounds pretty Judaic. I'm a jealous God, and thou shalt have no other gods before me. It has that kind of Islamic, Judaic, Christian ring to it. But then Krishna doesn't condemn them to a fiery hell for all eternity. Rather, his next verse, he says, yeah, that's okay. If you want to do that, I'll actually help you have faith in those deities. But it does maintain that Krishna is the cynosure of all existence. And that your faith in those other deities is, at the very least, incomplete because you don't realize the reality of the situation, that there is one deity above everything that is making all things possible, and that not a blade of grass moves without that will. And so you do find a strong monotheism in the Gita. In many ways, the Gita is very similar to the Judaic revelation within the Babylonian culture. There's a polytheistic Babylonian culture, and Judaism rose up as this idea, this radical idea that there was one deity above everything. And so you find the same idea in the Gita being espoused. Anyway, then Krishna says, Sataya Shraddhaya Yukta, yoked to their faith. Tasya Aradhanam Ihate, they, in desiring to worship. Labate Chatata Kaman, they get whatever they desire. Mayaiva Vihitan Hitam, but actually it's given by me. It's decreed by me. Antavatupalam Tesham, but their fruits are limited. They have an end. They're material. And tadbhavati alpamedasa. The fruits of those people with very, very little intelligence are limited. Devan deva yajo yanti. Those who are sworn to the gods go to them. Mad bhakta yanti mam api. Those who worship other gods go to them. Mad bhakta yanti mam api. But my devotees come to me. So it's a slightly complex argument. It's not super difficult. But what Krishna's saying is, and first of all, the worst things there is no conception of evil in Sanskrit. There's no word for evil in Sanskrit. Nor is there a conception of innate evil in Indic thought. In traditional Indic thought, especially at the time of the Gita, there was no conception of innate, fundamental evil like we have in the West. And so the worst thing you could be is ignorant. Ignorance was as close as you got to true evil. And the other worst thing you could be is overly lusty. And so, by Krishna saying their intelligence was stolen by lust, it's pretty much the biggest insult you can lay on somebody philosophically in ancient India. It's as close as you get to calling somebody truly evil. You're essentially throwing every dirty word in the book at them, because there's no conception of innate evil or eternal hell or anything like that. So Krishna says that there are these people who are filled with bad qualities, not innately, but they become addicted to them. The result of which is that they approach other gods. Now that's starting to sound really sectarian, but it's not, because what Krishna is critiquing here is the worship of many deities, not the worship of a singular deity under a different name. It's important to note that the only conception within ancient India of a singular deity was the Vishnu Krishna conception. If you looked at Shaktavad, or the Shakta philosophy, the philosophy of worshiping the goddess alone, that was all impersonalism, where there were many goddesses, and you would worship your village goddess who would fight with other goddesses. And so Hinduism was polytheistic or monistic, and Krishna critiques monism in just a second in the next verse, which we'll probably skip. But Hinduism was polytheistic, and if you believed in Ganesh or Shiva or any of these other deities, there was no conception of them in any ancient sacred text where they were posited as being the supreme. Let me just say that again. Shiva, Ganesh, Durga, Kali, etc., etc. Murugan. Take your pick, whether you're from north or south. It's up to you, like wherever you want to go. There is no conception that that deity was the cause of all causes, the supreme Lord, the one without a second that you should be devoted to, and then go back to the spiritual world and serve in perpetuity. That philosophy only existed within the Vaishnava tradition, within the worship of Krishna. So what Krishna is critiquing here is polytheism, which would mean that Muslims, Christians, and Jews are exempt from this critique because they believe in one deity. Do you guys follow this? And so although it sounds sectarian to our sectarian-trained ears, because it's usually my God versus your God, but both of us are monotheists and think the other one is evil, that's not what's going on here. That would be a misunderstanding of the culture and the philosophical arguments being presented. What's really a theological argument that's being presented. What's being presented is a critique of polytheism, of many different deities. And you go to these many different deities, but you don't realize that there's one. And that one is giving you faith in the many. But if you're worshiping the many, you're not getting the ultimate fruit of devotion because you're not worshiping the one supreme. You're worshiping a demiurge or a street-level dealer where whatever product you're getting is going to be cut. And therefore, what's the cutting? Well, those personalities you're worshiping are themselves going to die, and therefore they can't give you anything which is forever, and therefore antavat palam. They give you fruits which are limited. And you're begging for the wrong thing. Like we were also up in the mountains, we were in the Himalayas, and I'm just being slightly facetious. But I did spend a lot of time in the mountains, and so I'm not being, it's a little tongue-in-cheek, but I'm not being entirely inaccurate. Generally speaking, men are lazy in the mountains. They do not work as hard as the women. You see them hanging out, smoking chillums on their veranda, while the women carry these monster piles of sticks for firewood. And you see it all over the place. I've seen a lot of it. A lot of women get eaten by tigers compared to men up in the mountains too. I think there's been, if I'm not mistaken, I want to say over 1,000 deaths by tiger mauling in the last 10 years up in the mountains. It's like not a small thing. We saw leopard footprints when we went to bathe in the Ganga because we go out in the middle of nowhere, and big leopard footprints. I got a picture of one. Big. Like big. Big claws. And I've seen leopards in the mountains too. And then once they get that man-eater tendency, they got to put them down because they become fearless and they go for round 2 and 3. But there's the parable. There's the woman. She's gathering sticks. You see them when they're young. They're bent over because they got to support the big pile of sticks. By the time the women are old, they're permanently bent over. When they put the sticks down, they're still hobbled over because they spent their life collecting firewood because they're up in the mountains and life is rougher up there. So anyway, there's a woman, she had a big mountain of sticks on her back, and she didn't rope it right, and it fell off, which is just, it's rough. You know, you spend your whole day collecting sticks, putting them on your back, and you're walking home, and the whole thing wipes out, but you timed it. The leopards are coming out. It's going to get dark soon. It becomes problematic real quick. And so she's crying, "Oh, Vishnu, Vishnu." And then the Lord appears. And says, "Yes, my devotee, what can I do for you?" She goes, "I've got to get home. It's getting late. I'm afraid of being eaten by a leopard. And leopard maulings are way more common than tiger maulings, FYI. But I'm being afraid of being eaten by a leopard, and could you help me put the sticks back on my back? And Vishnu says, yeah, sure. And just gets the sticks back on her back, and it's all tied up perfectly, the best knot that's ever been tied. And she goes home. And she's stupid. Because she had Vishnu, and he was asking her what she wanted. She could ask for anything, and all she asked was to load her up like a mule again. And so, you go so far as to get Shraddha, faith, and beg for Shraddha, and be a bhakta, be sworn to somebody. Past participle of bhaj, to be devoted to somebody. And you're following the niyamas, you're following the rules of a tradition. And you're asking, and you're doing archana, you're worshiping. And you got that desire to worship. Ichati architum, you have a desire to worship. But then you end up falling short, and you end up worshiping a demiurge or a partial, or being devoted to an actor or a rock band or some famous musician or some TV show or whatever, some demiurge. And you never develop a proper conception of divinity. You made it all the way there. You put in all the effort. You bought the ticket and then just went to the bathroom. You bought a ticket to I don't know, whatever, LA Philharmonic, and just went in and used the bathroom. You get it? That's the critique Krishna's offering. It doesn't actually pertain to Islam. You don't find Krishna critiquing other traditions that believe in a supreme, because the Vaishnava tradition was the only tradition in ancient India that had that belief. And so those arguments about how to liaise with other traditions took place much later, as we began to come in contact with other religious faiths that also believed in a singular source of everything. Do you guys follow that? So, I was in Rajasthan, hadn't been to Jaipur in 30 years, was up in the morning, saw the star and the crescent, and heard the call to prayer. Was feeling some love for Islamic culture. It's hard not to. Was simultaneously aware of the atrocities that they committed against people that I would give my life 1,000 times over to protect, and for temples as well, that I would do the same for. And I was thinking about the Rajputs and how they were deeply embedded with them, even to the point where they were fighting the Jat kings over the Muslims, and how they simultaneously gave shelter to all of our primary temples, and was looking at the merging and cross-pollination of Islamic and Hindu culture that is perhaps most prominently on display in Rajasthan, more so than anywhere else in the world. Mughal culture is on display in other places, like Agra and Delhi, but the merging of the two, that's really prominent in Jaipur, because the Jaipur kings, the Rajput kings, Sawai Jai Singh and his lineage managed to keep their independence, up until India won its national independence. They were forced to either join India or Pakistan. And I was thinking about these people, these Muslims who, went far from home and, lived out in the plains of India and dealt with the Thar Desert and dealt with the water scarcity and had their music and song and dance and philosophy and scriptures and contributions to the world, and who in many ways are just a different version of the same tribe I feel membership in, and how they have a right to the same feeling of community and camaraderie and love and depth that I do. But then I also thought, and this is the final point, I also thought what distinguishes our tradition from every other tradition on the planet. And then when you get down to a tradition which has done the math enough to get to the idea that there's a supreme Lord, a supreme source of all existence, the next question, to really appreciate your own tradition and somebody else's, is to ask, what's the nature of your conception of divinity? Do you believe God's merely masculine? If so, how do you account for femininity? Is femininity evil? How do you get evil from an all-good, all-powerful God? Well, we created evil. We didn't create the feminine of the species. We might have eaten the forbidden apple, but God created Adam and Eve. Well, femininity is therefore good. Why isn't it represented in your iconography? Why don't you also have feminine names for God? There is a Shekinah within certain strains of Sufi Islam, but that's another subject, a feminine conception. And then, what about the problem of evil? Do you believe in eternal hell? How is that congruent with an all-merciful deity? How can anybody ever lock you away forever? For thought crimes? That's ridiculous. You believe the wrong thing and you go to hell forever? That's not compatible with an all-good, all-powerful deity. Is God angry? Is he violent? Does he rule through fear? Or is your conception of divinity a loving one? Is God attractive? Are your sacred texts filled with threats of punishment? Is that really in accord with the nature of an all-good deity? If you do manage to get to a loving deity, what's the nature of your love? Is it formal, the way you would worship a king? That doesn't make much sense. Rulers make bad lovers. If there's too much of a hegemony between the deity and the devotee, there's too much of a power differential, how deep can such a formal, attenuated, circumscribed, crippled, awestruck, terrified, ultimately fear-based, hegemonic, how deep can that such a love be? And even though I can appreciate other cultures, other religions, monotheism and other traditions, my head's still screwed on straight, and I can still do a comparative analysis of traditions. As far as my intelligence will allow me, our conception of divinity is absolutely, breathtakingly gorgeous, stunning, beautiful, to the point of being ecstatic and rapturous. A masculine and feminine conception of divinity, worshiping God as a child instead of an adult so your love will flow more freely and you won't ask for anything. God ultimately is a lover as Cupid, rather than some kind of tyrant, no weapons, just a flute. What kind of lover? The simplest, most approachable, just picking up a peacock feather off the forest floor and putting it in his hair instead of even wearing a crown. Disporting himself on equal terms with his devotees, forgetting his own divinity in divine rapture, along with his angelic-like devotees who also forget his divinity so their love can increase without limit. A full masculine and feminine conception of divinity, a complete, both moieties, both halves. The goodness in all people, the value in all people, the value in other traditions, a deity who's willing to give you faith in other deities, if that's what you want to do, and at the same time let you know there's something else, but leave it up to you how you want to play it, honoring your free will above all things, always leaving the door open. That's where our tradition really comes alive and demonstrates its ingeniousness and ultimately its revelatory nature. Such that when you look at it dispassionately, you're like, wow, that's a revelation. That's such a beautiful idea. It must have got dropped down from above. Nobody just came up with that on their own. And I think we should be able to merge without mushing. We should be able to liaise without losing our own identity. We should be able to appreciate other traditions and find common ground and see what's common to all traditions and work through an argument, even if it might look one way, and actually work through it and see what's really being stated. And appreciate that Islam and Judaism and Christianity do represent things quite akin to and parallel to Vaishnavism because they believe in one Supreme Lord. And then we should at the same time be able to look and still compare and contrast those traditions with one another and appreciate the unique and beautiful and really philosophically astute, coherent and comprehensive theology that we've been given. That was fortunately kept alive by those Rajput kings. That's flourishing even today in Jaipur. It's still alive and well in Vrindavan. That's as compelling and intriguing and beautiful and stunning as it's ever been. That will always be that. Because it's perennial. Because it's forever. Because it's a really deep and profound, well thought out, revealed tradition that climbs the Mount Everest of philosophical and theological thought and presents bewitchingly beautiful, impossibly beautiful conceptions of divinity. And it's truly a wonder of the world. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about. So, 58 minutes. We're a little late. Let's do some kirtan. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.